Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to the R.A.U.F show. You're listening to Mukhtar, and in studio today I'm joined by Brother Suhail as well as Brother Muhammad. Before we get our show on the road, I'd like to just let everybody know if anybody has any questions, queries or comments, you can contact us via WhatsApp. Our WhatsApp line is open. It is 060-904-1056. Let me repeat, 060-904-1056. So last week I understand that there was a topic which was run by my dad, and one of the things that he discussed in that program was the abuse of prescription medication. And I think it's quite fitting that we actually continue the discussion with regards to abuse of prescription medication, because we are currently in the midst of matric examinations. Schools are going to be starting their exams come the next couple of weeks, and it's very important to note that a lot of the medication that's abused via prescription sometimes, especially amongst the youth, actually the excuse given is that it helps them to stay focused, it helps them to study and so on and so forth. And it's something that's hitting the youth quite hard. And we have Brother Muhammad in here who's going to actually give us a bit about the prescription abuse that he experienced in his life of addiction and also now in recovery. And Brother Suhail will also inshallah be co-hosting with me and also giving his viewpoint. So without much ado, I'd like to call upon Brother Muhammad to tell us, or to kick the program off inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam.
I think it would be fitting to begin the program by mentioning the dynamics of prescription drug abuse. I think prescription drug abuse happens for three reasons. The first is that it happens when poly drug addicts or addicts that are already addicted to substances such as illicit substances, cocaine and the like, look for avenues to either make themselves feel more euphoric, more, to boost those feelings, that fulfillment they take from the drugs. And so they use prescription medication alongside the illicit substances. The second is, as Brother Mukhtar mentioned, where there is negative perception where such and such drug will help with focus for exams, or such and such drug will help make you sleep at night. So totally unprescribed, unsupervised by medical professionals, people start using prescription medication. And the third is people who have been prescribed, especially antidepressants, the like sedatives, hypnotics and so on, for legitimate psychiatric disorders, for legitimate mental illnesses. And what happens with time, they start finding some sort of fulfillment in the drug. Maybe it's taking away some emotion or something, so they start misusing the drugs. So maybe they use more than their prescribed dosage and so on and so forth, and before they know it, they also are becoming addicted and are abusing the prescription medication. So I think we'll tackle each on its own merit. We'll start with the excuses. In the pharmacy, legitimately there are drugs which mimic the effects of amphetamines like cat, crystal meth, cocaine, stimulants, uppers. Some are diet pills. Some are used for ADHD. And common perception among students, especially during exam time, if you take this tablet, you'll be able to study. And so this has become a real challenge among students. And then the second, where poly drug users or users who are already addicted to other substances look to boost the addiction, or probably some users who are using uppers. Now they're looking for downers to sleep at night, so they look for it in the pharmacy. And I think there we have drugs like the benzodiazepine class of medication. Something we commonly discuss is 542s or Rohypnol being something which is very abused in South Africa, very abused in our Indian communities. Something which, as far as I can remember from a young kid, it was the in thing. Something which the girls of our communities feel like they can get away using, and they use it as a downer to counter effect the effects of crystal meth or cocaine.
Brother Muhammad, talking about benzodiazepines and so on, right? So That's also commonly used as a date rape drug, because one of the effects, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, one of the side effects of benzodiazepine use is forgetfulness and memory loss. Am I correct? So also, just to touch on what you're saying now, so if you look at the commonly misused prescription drugs, and you've mentioned a few of them already, there are things like opioids or painkillers, benzodiazepines, which is your anti-anxiety medications, and stimulants, as you mentioned, like rohypnol and so on. So these are medications, rightly so, as you've mentioned, that sometimes are prescribed because of an actual situation where a person does require the medication. But then also we need to remember that the human body does build up a tolerance after time or over time, and with that and it's the same thing that happens with actual illicit drugs, if you want to call it that. So the person will actually now start to look for more and to start to use more, because they're now starting to become more tolerant to the currently prescribed dosage.
Definitely. So so when it comes to people who are legitimately prescribed Schedule 5, Schedule 6 medications, maybe tricyclic antidepressants or SSRIs, which is another class of antidepressants. So they start and they're given a specific dose, and this dose starts making the changes in the chemical systems. It starts sort of fixing the deficiencies in the chemical processes, and they start feeling better. But with time, they need more and more. And if they don't go to their psychiatrist for a review, recheck, oftentimes psychiatrists, to prevent the person from becoming addicted to a drug which they have prescribed, they will, when they see that the patient is starting to become tolerant, they'll try to wean the patient off that specific substance and maybe introduce a new substance, just to prevent tolerance and dependence. But I think by then and I can feel the pain that a lot of people in depression and a lot of people that have anxiety and suffer with all of these mental illnesses feel. I can understand where they're coming from when they feel like, this is helping me and I got this now and I'm going to do this on my own. But what they don't realize is that in actual fact, they are slowly priming themselves to become addicts.
I'm just thinking now while you're talking, there was a program on one of the streaming services that actually spoke about benzodiazepines, and there was a specific brand that they had interviews and so on it. And one of the guys made I think it was a doctor, I can't remember. He basically said that when you take these things, right, it somehow or the other tricks your brain into now making that part of the brain docile. So that part of the brain that's supposed to secrete certain enzymes actually goes to sleep and no longer works. And then what happens is when the person now starts to wean off, and if not weaned off properly, with supervision of a medical doctor and so on, it could actually lead to symptoms like, for example, suicide and suicidal tendencies. Now, understand this, right? We have youngsters, youth out there that are actually taking these things on a regular basis for recreational use, and they are not prescribed by medical professionals. They are not being weaned off by medical professionals, and the dosages sometimes go into. Look, I can say that from our experience at R.A.U.F, we've heard of people that have been taking 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 handfuls of pills at a time just because the last lot didn't work.
Definitely, where they're supposed to be taking 1 and 2 as prescribed, they're taking the 50s and the 60s now to feel the effect. And
then what happens, and this way it makes a psychiatrist and psychologist jobs quite difficult, is because if you look at a person that's now getting psychotic episodes because they now no longer can have access to their drug of choice or their prescribed prescription medication that they're using as their drug of choice, they will start to portray the symptoms of a person that has a mental illness or a mental issue.
Definitely. I think when we read the potential consequences of drug abuse and we see words like dementia and psychosis, it's very hard to wrap our heads around, because I don't think many of us in our homes or in our lives, in our communities, we actually experienced somebody who has had psychosis or had dementia. But we coming from this life now, and we being in this program now and being exposed to this, I can tell you firsthand, I've seen people totally psychotic because they're abusing prescription medication. Personally, at the end of my addiction, way back in 2021, I had serious psychotic episode where, I did very irrational things. I was standing in my backyard and screaming and demanding things and, totally something I'd never do. And I didn't care for anybody, and I was absolutely irrational. Nobody could speak to me. I remember, if I remember correctly, I was doing things like pulling my t-shirt off, putting it back on, rocking back and forth, holding my head on my hands, like what you'd see in the movies, like what we consider psychosis when watching the movies. And that came as a result of me using crystal meth as an upper, and then using opioids to sleep at night. And the two in my body together caused me to go into a psychosis. And medically, there is an illness called SAID, substance abuse induced psychosis. And it's a reality. Dementia is a reality. And in the long run, abusing these drugs increase the chances of people developing Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, all because it's simple, because the body, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created the body in such a way where it regulates specific neurotransmitters, and the way they all conjoin and work with each other to develop levels of specific chemicals in our brain, specific chemicals in the cells of our body. And then these drugs, we put them in our system. And whereas these drugs are meant to correct deficiencies, now we don't have these deficiencies, and now we're putting them into our system. So what are we doing? We're taking our already normal system and we're abnormalizing it, and the body doesn't know how to respond to this, because now it's either boosting our serotonin or it's boosting our aminobutyric acid, or it's called GABA, and all of these are hormones which are directly linked to emotions, directly linked to our body's temperature control, directly linked to our reflexes. So what happens once all of this starts going, once these chemical receptors start going, if I may say, offline, is that the right word to use? Once the levels start fluctuating, the brain doesn't understand what's happening, and so our reflexes become erratic. Our emotions are all over the place, our temperature centers are not functioning, so we're feeling hot when it's cold and cold when it's hot. So literally, it's starting to make us mad, psychotic.
Listening to this and just thinking about all of the experiences we've had at R.A.U.F and how many of the brothers and sisters that have come in that state. So, one of the things that prescription medication, one of the groups of people that prescription medication hits a little bit harder is actually our women folk out there. So, you will find that prescription medication abuse affects women uniquely, as they are often prescribed certain medications more frequently, and in some cases may experience addiction differently from men. Okay, so if you look at, one of the reasons why women actually have this issue is women have a higher prescription rate as compared to men. So women are more frequently prescribed medications like opioids for pain, benzodiazepines for anxiety, and stimulants for ADHD. And they are also more likely to be prescribed medication in higher doses and for longer durations than men, which can increase the risk of dependence and or misuse. Now, here again, I just like to make this point out, known to anybody who may think that we're trying to now slam the medical fraternity in any which way, shape or form. This is not the case. All we are doing here today is trying to highlight the fact that, we always understand that drug abuse and a drug addict is always going to be a man who's always going to be on either, rock or sugars or heroin or crystal meth or cocaine or one of the, the hardcore drugs. We look at cannabis as something that's, by the way, but we don't realize how important and how dangerous the education around prescription drug abuse is.
Definitely.
I know of a brother who came to the program some years back, and he had been for an operation, right? It was quite a serious operation. And after the operation, the doctors had prescribed him medication, right? To obviously deal with his pain and so on and so forth. But what had happened was this brother had now started, as you mentioned, to enjoy the high. Enjoyed the fact that the pain medication is making him, nice. So what had happened was he now started using more and more and more of the pain medication. And however which way he manipulated the doctor into giving him more, he got more. Whether it was legally, illegally, prescribed or bought, whatever the case was, he got more. Until it got to a point where it started to damage him both physically and mentally. And then eventually when he came into the program, he was so such a hardcore drug addict, but the only drug he had ever taken was prescription drugs.
I'd like to come in here. The ways and means of obtaining prescription medication. I think we sometimes don't realize that wherever there's a demand, there has to be a supply. And if you look at the case, we use a classical example in something which is we spoke about earlier is the Rohypnol 542. It was very widely abused in South Africa. And on top of that, as Mukhtar rightly mentioned, it also was one of the major factors which promoted the date rape. Date rape, where guys were using these tablets to get girls high. And it actually causes anterograde amnesia, so they don't remember. They totally, their movements are totally normal, everything's totally normal, but they just don't remember what happened, and they just give in. And so way back, I think in the late 90s, early 2000s, the South African government actually realized that this was becoming a problem, so they removed Rohypnol from the South African medicines formulary. And so Rohypnol was no longer available on the shelves. It was no longer available in hospitals, no longer legally available. However, the Rohypnol was still on the drug scene. And when we ask how, this is where the mafia, the cartel came in, and they seen the need for this drug. And so they started bringing it illegally through other countries in Africa. And the drug was being imported illegally. So where there's a demand, there's a supply. However, it's important to note that, unfortunately, in life is such where, everybody's looking to make a buck. And so there are some unscrupulous people, I would say, in maybe employees of pharmacies, employees of hospitals, are also looking to make a buck. And so nowadays it's very easy to walk into some pharmacies, maybe to go to some hospitals, and to actually obtain prescription medication without having a prescription. I know another serious thing, something which I was also charged for way back, and something which I also got myself involved in addiction, was a prescription forgery, where we got a doctor's prescription and we forged it, and by any way means possible, an addict will want their drugs. So we should bear this in mind, that it's easily obtainable from many channels.
Thank you for that, Brother Mohammed. Just to get back to the women and prescription medication, right? Just also, by the way, this is not anything that I pull out of my back pocket. This is actually statistical information which we've downloaded and we've also, researched. So one of the reasons that prescription medication also hits women a bit differently compared to men is because of the difference in biology and progression. So women's bodies process drugs differently due to biological factors like hormone levels and body composition. Studies show that women may develop dependence on prescription drugs more quickly than men, a phenomenon known as telescoping. This quicker progression to addiction means women might suffer the consequences of misuse sooner, affecting their health and their personal lives. Now, if you look at, the woman, and one of the reasons, the reason that women actually now start to get addicted to prescription medication is obviously women go through pain, every so often. Women go through sometimes what's called postpartum as well. And these are all medications, and there are medications which are actually given to help with those things. But at the same time, it comes down, it's a twofold thing. You can't blame the medical fraternity for doing their job. But at the same time, you can't blame the person for receiving the medication. It comes down to how do you use the medication that you are given. I'll give you a small example before we stop for an ad break. About a month or two ago, I think it was, my son broke his hand, right? And when he had gone to hospital via trauma, he received a bottle of pain medication. And the pain medication was quite strong. It was a scheduled drug, and he was told to take it so many hours, 2 per every so many hours. So us now, with the experience that we have, we gave it as per requirement. When he had gone for surgery to replace or to repair the broken arm, they'd given him another bottle. Now we still have a full bottle there. Right? They gave another bottle, which is also the exact same pain medication, with the exact same dosage and the exact same amount of, how to use this thing. And if you look at it, if my son at that point were to use 2 pain tablets every 6 hours or 3 times a day or whatever it is, and he's not feeling any pain and he's starting to enjoy the high of the pain medication, the possibility of him now looking and lying to me or lying to us for more is there.
Definitely.
So we have to also use pain medication in the way that it's supposed to be used. Yes, for things like antibiotics and so on, definitely non-negotiable. You take them as you need them, as prescribed, right? But in my personal opinion, and this is me speaking personally, is in our home, pain medication is only given and only used if the pain is completely and very untreatable. It's now gotten to such a point where you are almost going to start pulling out your hair. Then you'll take a pain medication to try and help you with this. And it's something that we need to also keep in the back of our minds. For every small nick and cut and bump, we'll now go and look for some medication to try and help us, not realizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in His infinite mercy and wisdom has given us the ability to actually deal with these things without medication. But in saying that, remember, medication is prescribed by doctors because they see a reason for the medication to be prescribed. We as the patients and those people receiving the medication need to ensure that we are not abusing that medication. Inshallah, we'll stop for a quick ad break, and when we get back, we'll continue this discussion. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the R.A.U.F show. You're listening to Mukhtar, and in studio today we're joined by Brother Muhammad as well as Brother Suhail. Our topic of discussion is the same as last week, just a small continuation where we're discussing prescription medication and the abuse of prescription medication more specifically. If anybody would like to send us any communication, any WhatsApps or any questions, queries or comments, you can do so on 060-904-1056. Let me repeat, 060-904-1056. So prior to the ad, we were discussing the abuse of prescription medication and how it is sometimes the onus of the person that's actually receiving the medication to be more vigilant with regards to how the medication affects them. Because we have to admit that when medical professionals prescribe medication, it's for a reason. And we as the people that's getting the prescription and the layman on the street need to understand that this medication is there to help us get through a tough time. And then when that tough time is gone, we need to stop the medication. I mean, we can't be taking pain medication every day just because it makes you feel nice. We also touched on the fact that the most commonly, or the 3 more commonly used or abused prescription medications are your benzodiazepines, your opioids, as well as your uppers, for example, your ADHD medication. Right? And then we also touched on the point of women. We always have the stigma that drug addicts are always men, or predominantly men. And we always have this preconception that men only take, or drug addicts only take hardcore drugs. We label the drugs that people become addicted to as cannabis, cocaine, and so on and so forth, not realizing that prescription medication is abused as much as hardcore illicit drugs, if I can use that frame or those words in this conversation. And from the men, women and children that are out there in community, we will find that prescription medication hits women hardest. Prescription medication abuse hits women hardest, and statistically, speaking scientifically, it's purely because of the genetic and hormonal makeup that it does affect them a bit more. But in saying that, Brother Muhammad, who does have a lot of experience with prescription medication, will be giving us a bit more. So we're going to now talk about the lower level drugs, prescription drugs, things that you can buy over the counter. And it's something that's also affecting our youth quite a bit, as well as obviously our adults, but it's a growing trend among the youth. Brother Muhammad?
Yeah, I think here when we look at Schedule 2 over-the-counter medications, which is not necessarily a prescription medication. I mean, you can go into the pharmacy with the symptoms of a flu, with symptoms like I have a headache or toothache, and ask them for something, and they'll give you something. And there are so many formulations for flu, for pain, and for a variety of other things, for allergies, which are combination medications. And a lot of these medications are one of the ingredients in the medication is opioid based. It's a codeine derivative, and these become a challenge because it's a very highly addictive substance, codeine, as we all know. And
if I could just ask Brother Muhammad, in the family of codeine, what other substances or medications are closely associated?
Now, in the pharmacy, it will mostly be codeine. Okay. But if you look illicitly, it's exactly codeine and heroin, morphine is all from one class of drugs. Basically, the base molecule is the opium poppy, the poppy plant, and it's morphine. And from morphine, they derive codeine and heroin. So it should, just by understanding that the three are so closely linked, you should understand how potentially devastating becoming addicted to codeine can be. And so we many people innocently ask the pharmacist for something for the flu, and the pharmacist, as Mukhtar said now, prescribes or suggests or recommends a formulation based on his experience, his understanding, his his interpretation of what you're telling him, the symptoms. So he doesn't really know the dynamics, whether you're an addict or not, whether you have a history of addiction, or that codeine is a drug of abuse, so you're buying it to abuse it, you understand? So we should be wary, especially as caregivers, when going into the pharmacy and selecting a medication. Let's always try to use the mildest one first. Let's maybe make a request that, okay, I'm looking for a painkiller, but for a start, don't give me an opioid-based painkiller, something like paracetamol or, whatever else it may be, something which is less addictive. And in every single medication to some extent has addictive potential. Every single medication. If I look at life experience, I know of like old people in my family who basically won't sleep at night if they don't take one Panado every night, which is not necessarily a bad addiction, but it's somewhere stored in the back of their mind. There is a psychological addiction linked to that Panado, that if I don't take this Panado, I won't sleep at night. So always look for we negate the risk to risk control. Go into the pharmacy, say, I need a painkiller, but give me something that doesn't have an opioid in it. I need a flu medication, but give me something that doesn't have a stimulant in it, because many flu medications have stimulants in them, understand? And if that doesn't work, there are Schedule 2 medications and they are there to assist us. Move on to the next one. But I'm quite confident that we will find the relief and that we're looking for in the non-opioid medications.
Before we go on further with this conversation, we do have a small question here. I'm gonna read this message out, and then inshallah one of the brothers will be able to maybe answer this question. So the person sent the message would like to remain anonymous. So essentially, with regards to severe arthritis pain and the use of cannabis oil, how harmful or recommended is it? Before anybody answers, I'd like to just firstly say that, look, I don't know how to answer this question, because, I'll give you an example of a person that I experienced, right? So there is someone that I know very, very close. I know his mom, his whole family quite close, and his mom had, she was quite ill. I'm not going to mention the illness. She was very, very ill, and he had heard that cannabis oil can help with the pain and so on. And what had happened was he'd started to give it to her, and she'd been taking it, and then eventually she got to a point after a couple of days. She said to him, listen, son, I don't like this thing anymore because it doesn't make me feel nice. So he asked, what do you mean doesn't make you feel nice? Is it not helping with the pain and so on? She said, no, it's helping with the pain, but the problem is I feel like I'm getting high, right? So look, it's not my place to say to a person, if this thing is helping you with regards to pain, it's for you to stop. But it is something that you should be aware of, that when it comes to cannabis and cannabis oil and the derivatives of cannabis, as long as there's THC in that, there is a possibility that you will have the hallucinogenic effect, and also the possibility of it becoming addictive. Brother Suhail, you want to maybe add anything to that?
No, I think you've covered that quite well, Mukhtar. It's, at the end of the day, something with THC is going to ultimately, impair you. So you're fixing one problem, but you're creating another.
So the
thing is, this is exactly, once again, where we're going down the road of mind-boggling ourselves. Speaking about this topic, it's a bit different for me because I come out of hard addiction. All right. So it's throwing me back into down memory lane of my metric year, where I was completely not a drug addict. I was a good boy. But when I was studying, if you remember those years, there's something called Bio Plus.
Yeah.
I used to have Bio Plus to keep me awake.
I think they still
to
have
study.
it.
Probably. Right. And then as time went by in my studies of Standard 9 and Matric at that time, I found that I always had a sweet tooth. So I used to eat something sweet, and that used to make my study fun. It made me look forward to studying. So, alhamdulillah, it wasn't the Bio Plus that wanted to make me study. It was actually the little popcorn that I used to have that used to keep me going. I used to look forward to it, And yeah, so that was my younger days. And then came my days where I was in full-blown addiction, where I never even looked at prescription drugs because I went straight from weed to cocaine to all the hardcore stuff, the illegal stuff. And this brings me back to the time before R.A.U.F. I went into a rehab and they've put me onto an antidepressant. I was super thin at the time, and the antidepressant actually I used it for quite some time, good few months, over probably a year. And it was something that made me bloated. I felt better about myself because I'm picking up weight from a guy that was always thin. Whether I was in addiction or not, I was always a thin guy. And this gave me some confidence. It gave me that feeling of, I'm looking good, I'm feeling good, but then I was also getting a bit too big, But from an addiction point of view, I look at it now as I took that medication. Time to time, I went to the doctor for the script, to get my script. That was the main reason I used to actually go to the doctor was for the script, not even check me up, And in time, it was making me feel good to a certain point, but not how I used to feel on hardcore drugs. So I speak about it from an addict point of view. You tend to have all these prescription drugs to fix the anxiety or the depression or whatever we want to call it, but it's never enough. So you end up going back to the same drug of choice. In my case was cocaine. So I've been now mixing the two, And then with that, we're speaking about codeine. Because of cocaine addiction, I used to have a lot of the sinus stuff, right? And the one that worked for me was the codeine one. So when I used to go to work, like a zombie, because I'm constantly on something. And I built this, we're speaking about how your body builds that tolerance. I built this tolerance where if anyone has to have 2 sinus tablets, KO, they're in bed. You know what I mean? Me, I used to go to work. I used to have it breakfast time, lunch time, just for the sinus to go away, so it makes me look okay, Not realizing how my body was actually crashing, because by the evening, I'm lacking sleep from last night, and then the next night I'm going back to the dealer and I'm buying my stuff again to keep me awake, because cocaine keeps you awake. And, it went on for months like that, until finally I found R.A.U.F. I crashed so badly. I found R.A.U.F. and, I'm learning about all of these things up till now. So, with prescription drugs, to me, were just as bad as my actual hardcore drugs. And I speak from personal experience. And now, in recovery, I've learned so much about, going to doctors, asking for certain things. And look, there's also doctors and pharmacists out there, like, Mohammed says, that don't really know from a recovery point of view what we actually go through, what we actually need. Because when I knew when I came out of R.A.U.F. and in integration, I had the flu. So it was my first time to this new doctor, and I told him, Doc, please, no codeine. right? Fine, he gave me no codeine. I said, I'm a recovery, I was strong, and I don't want this stuff. So he reckoned, no, good, very good, I'm proud of you, this and that. And years later, I go to the same doc when I have the flu. I had to stop going to him because he, as a doctor, didn't realize that I'm not only saying no codeine, there were other things that I didn't know about myself. It's my wife that actually picked it up. She says, hey, you're not supposed to have this. Then she picked up the phone, Uncle Ibrahim, this guy got this. And he says, no go. You know what I mean? So sometimes you can't blame the doctor, but at the same time, it's us to, as recoveries to look harder now, it's something new. And then also I had an experience at a pharmacy where I said specifically no codeine. But when the box came, I don't know for what reason, because now my guards are up, I read something that said something similar to codeine written on the box. And then I questioned it. And you know what? It was a no-go for me. So it's so important to actually watch what we take as recoveries as well. And I've seen numerous people, we're talking about people that are on prescription drugs that can't do without it. I mean, I think there was a documentary on Netflix that, I think we spoke about, Mukhtar. Yeah. We watched it. And at the end of the day, what level of, the guy cut it down by 0.5 milligram.
Yeah, and he almost killed himself.
And he ran up a mountain, stood at the end of the mountain. And if he didn't, at that point, it was touch and go. He was, coming to that point of jumping off a mountain. And he spoke about it. So this is the effect of drugs in general, whether it's prescription, illegal drugs, prescription drugs, or whatever. This is what the extent you can go to. So we're going back to the question of the cannabis, the oils. At the end of the day, it's what's in there. If it's natural, all okay. But if there's some sort of thing in there that will make you high, for example, already it's a no-go. So you're killing the pain, but you're creating something else.
Jazakallah for that, Suhail. We're just almost at the end of our show today. There is one more question. It's with regards to a brother whose nephew, I think it was, who has now quit drugs, but is currently only using Rohypnol. Because they need it on a day-to-day basis. So before we answer the question, I'm going to try and answer the question while doing the thing about the teens or the youth and finishing up at the same time. So prescription medication amongst the youth is a growing concern, right, with significant physical, mental and social implications. The reasons the teen and young adults are often at higher risk is due to factors like peer pressure, stress and easy access to medications. Now, one of the things that the youth actually use as an excuse to take these drugs is because they say it helps them for study boost or to stay awake and focus for longer periods. Now, this sounds very similar to what the brother who sent the messages, their nephew sounds like, because they need this Rohypnol to get through the day. But now if you ask yourself the question, you are numbing yourself because Rohypnol is a benzodiazepine. 100%. Right? And it's basically numbing your receptors so you can actually move through the day. And it comes back down to also something called substitution, where you leave one drug for another. And this is also something that a lot of rehabilitation centers need to also bear in mind, because sometimes they'll treat the addiction for heroin or cocaine with another drug. I'm not going to mention the name because a lot of people that have been to other rehabs know the name. But if you're substituting one drug for another drug with the same chemical compound and the result is the same, the high is the same, everything is the same, what exactly, where's the change? So look, we are at the end of our show today. I'd like to just give Brother Muhammad 2 minutes quickly.
Yeah, just to cap on this show, I think it's very important for our caregivers and loved ones out there to understand that the very first symptom of addiction and substance abuse is a change in behavior. So if they identify that their loved ones or their kids or children, their behavior is changing, and they find any capsule, tablet, syrup in their possession and they can't identify it, it's very important for the loved one to make sure they take that capsule, tablet, syrup to the pharmacy for identification and then educate themselves on what that is, because that could be the possible substance of abuse in the child's case. And we miss these things. You know, we take it that a flu tablet is a flu tablet, but we don't understand what's behind that flu tablet.
Also, if you find anything, take them for a test, because you need to know what's in their system. Just a quick public service announcement. Our WhatsApp number was, the R.A.U.F cell phone number was hacked over the weekend. So if anybody has received any messages, from that particular phone number from Friday night at about 5 o'clock, I think it was, please ignore those messages. I doubt anybody's received anything now, but just in case anyone does receive a message, please, we are apologetic for that. Someone hacked into our cell phone. With those words, I'd like to also say, for any SGB principal parent out there that wants more information on drug abuse, you can definitely give us a call on 031 269 3662. Let me repeat, 031 269 3662. Alternatively, contact us on our social media platforms and we will definitely be able to assist you. And please, 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 children out there, youth out there, don't go and do anything to help you study. Study on your own, with your own strength, on your own steam. Don't use medication to help you study. Maybe have a cup of coffee if it needs to keep you up at night, or maybe have some chocolates with you, or as Suhail said, some popcorn to help you study. But do not go and fall into the trap of taking something that's going to help you to study, when in actual fact it's going to make you forget. With those words, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.